Our guest today is Secretary of Transportation for the state of Illinois. He has served in this position for 8 months. Our guest today leads 13 offices that serve the transportation needs of Illinois across multiple modes, rural, suburban, and urban environments. He oversees a $2.8 billion budget, operating budget, that supports a workforce of 5,200 employees. And number 3, has oversight of more than $3.2 billion in capital projects. Prior to his appointment, he was the executive director of the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, CMAP. And a little-known fact is that he grew up in McHenry, Illinois. Ladies and gentlemen, Randy Blankenhorn. Randy?
Thanks, Jay. I really appreciate that. And that McHenry shout out is because Jay and I are kind of neighbors. He grew up there. There's a small fraternity of McHenry people that is growing larger every day, but Jay is certainly one of them and the lead member of that. So, thanks so much for inviting me. And thank the club and thank all of you for being a little patient. This is a rescheduled event because we were in the middle of what we thought were budget negotiations. And I said, I'll be glad to come in September when we have a budget. So eventually we will get there. But again, I appreciate all of you changing your schedules and coming out to meet me. I wonder who's watching the roads and bridges today. But that's another story. I think that you probably all came to hear me talk about what's happening today and what's happening with the agency and where we are today. And I'm going to disappoint you a little bit. I'm going to talk about tomorrow. I'm going to talk about what I think we need to be doing as an agency, what I think we need to be doing as an industry, what I think we need to be doing as a state to think about transportation in a completely new and different way. Maybe this is my roots of the last 9 years being at CMAP of looking to the future and looking longer term. But it really is something that I think that we have got to stop and take real deep thinking about where are we and where are we going. I used to say when I was at CMAP, when we would talk about workforce, I'd say, I'm afraid we are training for yesterday's jobs. In this business, I am saying that I'm afraid that we're planning for yesterday's transportation system. And I think we need to think about how that works and how it's going to work. And just to start with, in the technology business, we went from a flip phone to a BlackBerry to an iPhone to whatever is next in a matter of a decade. We went from what is the smallest thing that I can put in my pocket to what is the thing that gives me the most information, the most flexibility, the thing that makes most things possible. And I think we've got to think about that in the transportation system as well. Just 8 years ago this summer is the iPhone, and look at the changes that we've seen in that industry. We look at it also from the transportation system. From an analogy, it would be we used to print and still do state highway maps. They are very popular at state and county fairs. We can't give them out fast enough. But we went from that to MapQuest, which gave you directions that you printed off. From there to Garmin, and today to Waze, and how we think about how we get from place to place to place, and what is tomorrow, and how do we think about that? There's a revolution that's happening, and it's happening today. It's happening right now about how we get from point A to point B. Illinois has often been on the forefront of change. Illinois DOT were leaders in incident management through the Minuteman program that was a model for the rest of the country for how we remove accidents from the expressway system to make it work better. We have surveillance cameras on virtually every major section of the expressway so that public can view traffic in real time. We have sensors in our roads so that we don't have to send somebody out to figure out how much salt to put on in the winter. We can have that information, we can do the right thing, we can save money, we can save time, we can be more efficient in delivery. Our friends at the tollway went with maybe the best thing that they could have done 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago in open road tolling. I used to joke when I was at IDOT before that people didn't mind paying tolls. What people minded was waiting in line to pay a toll. And I think that's the kind of technology that Illinois has been on the forefront of the future. The CTA, the same thing. Bus Tracker is the best thing, in my opinion, that they ever did. I'm addicted. I live in the city, and I use it for every trip that I make. And there are times that if I look and I see there's a different bus coming behind me a minute that's going to save me 3, I'll jump off. It's that kind of technology and those kind of changes that really have provided a better consumer experience for our traveling public, and that's what's happening. So what's going to happen with transportation over the next 8 years in this iPhone time frame? We're looking at Google, who is already operating self-driving cars on the streets in California and Texas. Currently tested with real drivers, real cars behind the wheel. Eventually, without steering, automated driving will be coming. It points to a future where you can think about your travel in a different way. How do you spend your time traveling if you don't have to be the driver? If we are in a safer environment where we have less accidents, how do we think about designing for safety? If we can put cars and vehicles closer together, is congestion the issue, or is it something else? How do we think about this in a new way? We are open to various possibilities. The Michigan DOT has partnered with the University of Michigan over the last month or so to open what they call M-City. And it's a testing site for these autonomous vehicles, a virtual city that they've created with rural roads, with city crossings, with ramps to really test how these vehicles can be used. They are investing public and private money in their state's key industry. Is Illinois willing to step up and do that same thing? In Sweden, next year, Volvo will issue 100 autonomous vehicles for driving around Gothenburg. Normal people driving on normal streets, not a test, not a study, a pilot of what is the future and how is it going to be and how are we going to react. Cars that communicate with each other, cars that share information through the cloud. This is the future that we are not used to in the transportation industry, and we certainly aren't used to at the Illinois Department of Transportation. There's new thinking about freight, and as you all know, freight is a huge part of our economy in the state of Illinois, and it's also a huge concern for many of our communities. When I was at CMAP, my staff used to tell me that we're going to double the amount of truck traffic on our expressways over the next 20, 25, 30 years, and I would say, show me that. I can't imagine what twice the trucks look like on our expressway system. But through technology, I can. We're seeing something called truck platoons, which are basically connected trucks that are more like a train on our highway system, that are going to be able to move twice as many trucks in the same amount of space. How does that affect how we move goods? How does that affect how we receive goods in our communities and in our homes? We're exploding with information. We're exploding with technology, but what do we do with it? How do we get it into people's hands so that they can make good decisions? We have these overhead message signs, and I love to talk about this, that basically right now tell me how late I'm going to be. That's what they do. That's what they're for. We have bus tracker and train tracker that tell me this is what's happening here. How do I think about it in the total trip sense? We have a tollway smart corridor that's coming up on I-90 on the Jane Addams. That's a really good start, but how do we think about not just giving people information, but utilizing that information in a transportation system way? Traffic apps, I don't know. I have 3 different ones on my phone. I don't know how many you have. But how long ago was it that we couldn't even think about how we got information in that way? Things like express toll lanes that Bob and I have been talking about, of how do we make sure that we don't only build a system, but that we operate it in a way that makes sense in the long term. So if I'm building overhead message signs, and yet I can get traffic information here, why are we doing that? If we're not adding value with that, what are we doing here? If we're building detection loops into our pavements so that we can detect where traffic is, and yet I can have drones tell me what that traffic looks like. I can have cameras that tell me how that works. Are we really designing projects the right way? Or do we really need to think about this completely differently? And I think we do. We also have significant changes in demographics. Our region, our state is changing. Senior citizens is the fastest growing, over 65 is the fastest growing part of our population, and it's going to be for a while. And that's a good thing. But the issue is, are we going to build a transportation system and communities where they can stay here, where they can stay in Illinois? I don't want them moving to Florida. I don't want them moving to Arizona. I want my mother to stay here. And how do we make that possible? How do we make sure that when I take her driver's license away, because someday I will, maybe sooner than she wants, but when I do that, how do I make sure that she can get to the doctor? How do I make sure that she can do the social things that she wants to do? How do we create a transportation system that meets her needs? And a growing part of our population will be those needs. And if we don't do that, those people will leave. And that's not what we want to have happen. The other side of this equation is young people. Young people think about travel completely differently than we do. They drive less, they want more options, they want more active transportation options. And if it comes down to the fact that if I can drive a car or I can do this, I'm going to choose this. And we can't have them doing both. So they've got to make that choice. We've got to find a way that they can continue the lifestyle that they choose in a way that gets them to where they're going in different ways. We see different ways that our businesses are moving throughout this part of the region in particular, this part of the state. More businesses moving downtown, more young people moving downtown, more bigger corporations out in the suburbs again. How do we do this commute in a way that we attract and we keep the young talent that we need to be successful as a state of Illinois? We've seen an uptick in that action, but we haven't really thought through. We've been talking about what we call in the city to suburban commute the last mile for as long as I've been in this business. And I said 25 years ago, if there was an easy answer, we'd already be doing it. I was hoping 25 years later we would have an answer, but we really don't. And that's where we have to focus. We have to focus on the trip and not on the facility. We have to focus on where people are going, where they want to go, and how they want to get there in a way that makes sense to them. It's an individual lifestyle these days, and we have to be able to cater to that lifestyle. And so we're thinking about concepts that we think of as mobility on demand. We already have in the freight world logistics companies like Coyote Logistics and others that plan freight shipments, that broker this activity. Can we think about extending that to passenger trips as well? Can we broker passenger trips in a way so that it's less expensive, so that it's more on time, so that we are able to move people in different ways than we do today? And where do companies like Uber and Zipcar and Divvy fit into this equation? Are they part of a systematic look at how we think about transportation, or are they one-off companies trying to shoehorn their product into a system that doesn't fit them and doesn't fit their needs and truthfully is not going to fit our needs for much longer? So we see these shifts and we see these opportunities, but I think the question and the challenge for me really is I am not at all convinced that government can take the kind of action that is needed to make these things happen. I used to say that sometimes government's best job is to stay out of the way. But I think in this case, there has to be a partnership. So much of the infrastructure of transportation is owned by government that we really need to think about government's role. I am not confident. I gave the similar speech in Kansas City a couple of weeks ago. I am not at all confident, I told people, that government has the ability to react, much less anticipate what's going to happen in this market. What's going to happen in the transportation system that's going to make it different? Can we just imagine that once we get automated cars, how long it's going to take the federal government to write regulations? A dozen years? 15 years? By that time, these are obsolete. We have to be more nimble as government. We have to think about where we fit in this. We have to think about how we support research in ways that we have not before. But that's where our emphasis has to be, and that's where our looking forward has to be. The question for me is Illinois going to get off the bench? We were the most innovative DOT in the country, and we are not today. My staff that's here and the staff around Illinois have heard me say this to them, and it scares them a little, but it also excites them that we will once again be the most innovative DOT in the country. And how is that going to happen? It's going to happen because we're going to make people unafraid of being innovative. It's not when you have an idea, you put your head down and you hope that nothing bad happens. When you have an idea, you're not afraid to say, This is what I want to try, and if it doesn't work, we're going to figure out what went wrong, and we're going to try something else. I've told people that if you are not making any mistakes, you aren't trying hard enough. We've got to have that attitude instilled in our staff because the talent is there, the smarts are there. We have to create the culture that will allow them to think big and to think about what their transportation future is and how it works with that. But we don't have all the answers. IDOT is not going to come up with the solutions. It's going to be you. It's going to be our partners. It's going to be the public that know how to make things better, that know what needs to be done, that are not afraid to tell us what has to happen, and that, in all honesty, we changed some pieces of legislation that allow you to tell us what needs to happen. That has to change. If we are not successful if this is an IDOT-driven process. It has to be a transportation industry-driven process, and that's where you all come in. You have the great ideas. You know, all of you that work directly with us know, you can tell me for the next 6 days what we're doing wrong. You need to tell us. We need to know that, excuse me, we need to know how to make things happen. We have our own problems. Our technology is about 1985. I was really happy. I was walking through the break room yesterday or the day before, and I saw a instruction manual for Windows XP, and I thought we were getting an upgrade. But we can't even communicate with our partners in any way that makes sense. So we've got our own internal work that needs to be done, and we will do that. We will make sure that we give our employees and our partners what they need to get the job done, but there's a lot of work to do. The question is, how do we find those partnerships? How do we build those partnerships? The partners are already there. Whether it's our MPOs like CMAP here, or like our downstate partners, whether it's our universities. We have a wonderful university system with a lot of research going on that tends sometimes to be not on the periphery and not as focused as we would like. We've talked to Steve and others about how we change that, about how we build a coalition of universities so universities aren't fighting each other for our grants, but working together, and working together on two things. What do we need to solve today? And maybe as importantly or more importantly, what do we need to think about for tomorrow? That's the kind of things that happen. That's the kind of partnerships that are already out there and that we've really got to build in and make sure we're taking advantage of the resources that are already Illinois. Great universities, great planning partners. How do we make sure that we're taking advantage of this? We have other things going on. This past winter, Governor Rauner announced the creation of an Innovate Illinois Advisory Council. And those of you that have heard me talk before have said, we've talked about these innovation conferences and committees, and it always scares me a little bit when we have an innovation committee in government, because those are oxymorons for the most part. If you put innovation in a government box, it can't possibly be innovation. But I think the difference here is that it's not a government process. It's a public-private partnership that's really a working group to look at high growth clusters and attracting resources and developing and retaining talent, fostering the kind of collaboration that I was talking about early. I think this is really the mechanism for us to bring the right people together to talk about transportation differently. And if we don't, we can continue to let Michigan and California pass us by. I understand that we have problems today. I understand that many of you in the Q&A will probably ask me about those problems today. And they're real. And they're real, and we need to find a way to address them. We did a 39-city tour in the spring, 2,700 people, another couple thousand that responded online to talk about this and what it is that they needed. A wide spectrum of people, from corporate CEOs to small business owners to the public to our partners like you. And the message was loud and clear. We need to think about transportation differently. We need to think about how we invest in transportation differently. We need to think about the long term. When we talk about transportation funding in this state, we talk about capital bills. And we talk about shovel ready. And I hope I never hear either one of those terms again. We need to be putting together a sustainable transportation funding stream that is for, as the governor likes to say, for generations. Not for 5 years, not for 6 years, not for 10 years. And it's going to take all of us working together to convince people that this is the investment to make. We heard very clearly from the public that they are willing to make that investment if they can trust where the money's going. We have a problem in state government today in building trust with the public, and we've got to work on that. And we're going to do it by being more transparent, by talking about making investments in a way that you understand why are we doing this project and not that project. We're going to make sure that we've engaged the right people in that conversation, and it's going to be a different way of investing. It was maybe the most interesting thing that we heard, that no matter where I was in this state, people wanted to talk about multimodal. It wasn't just about talking about highways. They wanted to talk about transit. They wanted to talk a lot about freight because we have freight issues all around this state. They even wanted to talk about waterways and ports, which is actually not under IDOT's jurisdiction, which is probably something we should change. But they wanted us to think about this transportation system from that holistic way, that it is a system. It's not the railroads against the truckers. It's how does the system work together? It's not passenger space on the expressway versus commercial space on the expressway. It's how do we create a system that accommodates how we move people and how we move goods, and the public gets that. They understand it. They also understand that if we don't do a better job of moving freight, that we lose business. I heard from one of our downstate CEOs that's in business that said, you know, Randy, your highways are my warehouses. That's where I store things. And if you can't deliver just in time, then I'll find a state that will. And I think that's what we have to deal with. We have to deal with that problem of today without giving up on the problems of tomorrow. So the question is, if we have these problems that we have to face today, and we do, how do we do it? Is it the same old solutions? Are we designing for today, or are we designing for tomorrow? Are we building transit cars that will carry as many people as possible? Or are we carrying cars that people want to ride in and then make the experience one that they will say, I don't need a car on this trip? We've got to think about it in those perspectives of how do we think about tomorrow as we think about today? Do we continue to build overhead message signs that tell me how late I am? Or do we do a better job of getting the right information to private companies so I can look at the 3 different apps that I have on my phone and decide which one it is, but actually those 3 apps all having the same information. So that's where we are as an agency. That's the things that we're thinking about tomorrow. The transportation challenges are today, for today, but also for tomorrow. And if we don't find a way to think beyond our problems of today, we will have the same problems tomorrow. So thank you very much for having me today, and I'd be happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Secretary. Paul Green's not here today, but Professor Green would say, hey, just because you got an RFP or an RFQ pending in front of IDOT, ask the tough questions anyway. So send them on up here. Secretary, thank you very much. And it's great to see all our friends in transit here. There's a lot of people that are interested in what you have to say. And let's go back to the future or back to reality here with a few key questions. From Tom Kotarek from CMAP, one of your former compadres there. Can you name any policy?
No.
I love it. Can you name any policies you advocated for at CMAP that conflict with the policies of you, IDOT, or the Rauner administration? Welcome to the City Club. This is the big leagues.
Where's Paul Green when I need advice now?
He'd read that question.
Yeah, he would read that question too. You know, I think it's interesting that we've been able to take a lot of the work that we did at CMAP, and great work that CMAP still does, and really put it into play. As fast as we want? No. No question about that. But when I talked about making investment decisions differently, the performance-based programming that CMAP led is there. When I talk about express toll lanes, I mean, that's come out of that. Bob and I talked about that just in our meeting last month, and I asked him to revisit the Jane Addams and see if it makes sense to do that. 2 years ago it didn't. Maybe things have changed. Maybe we ought to do that. I don't think that there's anything from my past experiences at CMAP that are in conflict with where we want to go as an agency or where the governor wants to go as an agency. I will tell you that it's taking me more time than I thought. I have spent 7 months here now, and for the last month I've told anybody that will listen, I'm tired of talking and I want to start doing. And I think that's really where we are. But a lot of the groundwork that's been done by you, by our university partners, by our partners in the transit agencies and our engineering partners, that is the basis for what we want to do moving forward.
Great, thank you. Here's one from Leighton Olson. If the internet is the future and part of IDOT, what is the future and what partnerships can IDOT have, including local adoption of Illinois Dig Once rules for highway and fiber content?
Yeah, I think that, and thanks, Leighton, I think that one of the things that bothers the public the most is that when we go, whether it's just us or whether it's us in the utilities or it's us in the city, go back into somewhere we've already been. That when we go and do work and 2 months later the utility company comes in and does work and you know, that drives the public nuts, and it should. We've got to do a better job coordinating. The Dig Once program that Leighton talks about is the right way to do it. It's, again, the technology is here, the information is here. How do we make sure that all of us have it so that we know what each other are doing? And you know what? We've got flexibility to move schedules around to make sure we're only in a neighborhood or a community one time and we get out for a long while.
Great. From our friend Peter Scozzi at the Metropolitan Planning Council.
Again, no.
When is the state going to raise its gas tax for the sole purpose of infrastructure development?
Let me just say that when we talk about sustainable revenue sources, and we talk about a number of them, that all of them are on the table. I think that there are people that think raising the gas tax is the right thing to do. We heard that a little bit when we were on our listening tour. Those of you that have heard me talk, and most of you have, know that I am a believer in user fees. I believe that users pay. That's what makes sense to me. But I've also become a who benefits pays. And you know, the example that I use is I live about 4 blocks from here, and my car's in Springfield. So when I'm here, I don't have a car. And yet somehow my groceries get to the grocery store, and my TV got to my living room, even though I didn't pay a gas tax. So while we got to continue to have user fees as the basis that underlies our transportation funding, I think we have to think more broadly and ask the question, who benefits and how do we assign benefits in a way that's fair?
I love it. From my old friend and a great servant, as he was introduced earlier, John Gates, the former chairman of the RTA. He wants to know, you've had these hearings across the state. How can everybody in this room help you with respect to getting something done in Springfield?
Yeah, and John actually joined us on one of those, and maybe one of the most interesting ones. One of the stories that I heard there was from, we were in the northwest suburbs, and one of the principals at an elementary school told me that she has 4-year-old preschool kids that are on a bus an hour each way every day. That's a transportation system that is not working. So I thank you, John, for being a part of that tour with us. I'll say the same thing that I said then, and that is that we have to make the public understand that this is an investment in the economy and the strength of their communities. We've got to make sure that we are spending money wisely so that they believe that. And I think that's on us to do that. But, you know, I ask people, how much do you think you spend in transportation fees? And they tell me, and they are way out of whack. You know, you pay, now my kids are on my cell phone, but I've got a $220 a month cell phone bill. You know, I'm not paying a quarter of that in transportation fees. So we've got to explain that they're really getting a lot of value for what they're doing, but we have to do a better job of showing it. I think at the end of the day, it's all about convincing the General Assembly, right? And so to do that, it's about the stories. It's about the principal that has kids that are on the school bus for an hour. It's about small business trucking firms that told me, I got to change axles every 3 weeks because your roads are in such bad shape. It's about those stories that bring transportation home are what's going to sell. And you know those stories. You live those stories. You see them every day. We've got to start telling those stories. Talking about we need more transportation revenue so that we can build this road or extend that transit line, nobody cares. What they care about is what does it mean to me, and that's the transportation stories that you can help us tell.
From a number of friends of Metra, Congressman Quigley addressed the club on Monday, and mentioned more than once the need to rebuild and revitalize Chicago's historic Union Station. Amtrak owns the building, Metro's its major lessee. What's the state's role, if any, in the rebuilding and future of Union Station?
So there is a study going on right now on the future of Union Station, both existing station and what the long-term plans are. We are helping to match the federal funds for that. We have a person, one of my rail people is on the steering committee for that project. I agree. I think that Union Station, it's not only the historic sitting that it is, but it is where transportation happens. That neighborhood is the transportation hub of the city, and we've got to make Union Station work better. So, it's always a money issue. It's going to continue to be a money issue. But I think if we get the right plan together, and that's where we are today, working with Metro and Amtrak and the city of Chicago, we get that plan right, I think we can sell something.
Great. Ram from right over here, a member of the club wants to know, has IDOT considered the use of HOV or high occupancy vehicle lanes instead of, and I love how he puts express lanes in quotes, on the Kennedy?
On the Kennedy?
Yeah.
Well, I'll let Luann answer that. No, I think that HOV lanes, in my opinion, are really not where the future lies. I think that HOV lanes had their moment, and I think that moment is gone. I think it's about express toll lanes. I think that you use that capacity, and you not only are able to manage it by saying how many people need to be in a car, but you're able to manage it by the price that you charge. And so I think that there are a number of options to look at as we start to implement express toll lanes. Our study on the Stevenson, our study on the Eisenhower are specifically looking at that, and I've said I want to do more than look at it. I want us to be a priority to make sure that we can make it work. So I don't know. So I think it is managing lanes, which I think is maybe the question, is the right thing to do. HOV, in my opinion, is actually a step backward.
So here's one that's not holding back.
Oh, good.
Dave Bender. Is the Rauner administration drafting a capital bill, and which comes first, the Cubs in the World Series or a real capital bill from Springfield?
Dave knows me too well. I'm a Cub fan, so I would actually like to say the Cubs in the World Series. Sunday night is the first time that I've seen it. I watched it on TV, the first time from start to finish that I've ever watched a no-hitter. So it was very exciting. But I believe that when we get an operating budget for the state of Illinois, that the General Assembly and the administration are going to move directly into conversations about a capital bill. How long that takes and where and how we get there, I'm not sure. But you've heard, and I've heard, and many of you have heard the governor say that he wants to invest billions and billions of dollars in transportation infrastructure. And I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe him in that. So I think it is coming. I think it is soon. I will tell you flat out, we've got to solve the operating problem first.
Very easy one. What percentage of IDOT's workforce is unionized?
Yeah, 97%.
Two more questions, and
you can read in whatever you want into it.
we're expecting a one-word answer there, so it's fine. It is what it is. Let's end on a good note here. How's the Circle Interchange project going, and how's it being funded?
So the Circle Interchange, for those of you that avoided it, thank you. But it is an incredibly cool thing to watch going up. There's been live streaming of it on our website. I've been watching it go up. This is the second of 4 weekends, was last weekend. I actually asked them the first weekend if I could go down there and watch it, and they said no, I had to stay away. But 9 cranes operating all at once to move these huge steel beams. It's just a fascinating engineering and construction piece of work. So it's going great. We have had, I think it hasn't impacted people coming to the city, which is a good thing. It's impacted the way they come, which is maybe a better thing. I told Luann that I got 0 phone calls on either weekend, so I think we must be doing something right. But it is an engineering marvel. It is paid for primarily with federal funds. and obviously with some state money in there too. We will be done on time, we will be done on budget, but we still got a long ways to go on that, so be patient with us.
Two more. Is there really a 55-45 split with respect to road funding upstate versus downstate?
Yes, there is. I guess I could stop there. You know, it's something that this administration has talked about and we will continue to talk about, but first of all, there's not enough money for everybody. So we've got to make the pot bigger. 55-45 is an agreement that predates me at IDOT, and I was there a long time, of how we're going to spend money, and it's based on a lot of different things. I think when we look at this performance-based programming that Tom asked about, that's what we're going to talk about, is what are the right criteria to make the right decisions. I said, so we make decisions between districts 2 and 9 based on some criteria, and then we have this magic lop-off for District 1. Doesn't make all the sense in the world. That doesn't mean that there aren't issues that need to be dealt with. Honestly, if we were looking at next year's program, and in that performance way, District 1 might get less because we have 2 huge bridge projects going on downstate that are going to take a lot of money. But I think that's a better way to think about it, is not year to year, what does 55-45 look like, but how do you think about what we're trying to accomplish statewide? How do we meet the needs of people all across the state? And the needs are different. What is important in metropolitan Chicago is not the same as what's important in rural central Illinois, but it's just as important to them. And so we've got to make sure that we put criteria about that are fair, that are consistent, and then again, people can understand how we're making decisions.
Great. One last question before I turn it over to our fearless leader, Jay Doherty. And it comes from Kay Whitlock, member of the City Club, great engineer and lady. How do we get the focus on the condition of the system that you talked about? Everything, commodities, crops, waterways, navigation, the whole transportation system, and very similar to the earlier question, how can everybody in this room help you get your message out at IDOT?
So, one of the interesting things on this tour, as I said, that we heard a lot about ports and waterways. And it's not even a part of the department, it's part of DNR right now. Probably shouldn't be, but it is. And I talk about waterways, and I'll just use this as an example, the same way that I think we felt about freight 15 years ago, that railroads, they were privately owned, and what really is government's role? And yet we have a multi-billion-dollar partnership right now with the railroads up here called CREATE. We are actively planning for freight, not only to move goods, but for how it impacts Don's business every day with we're sharing of railroads and Amtrak's business and how we do intercity rail. And I think that 15 years ago with freight is where we are with water. And it's because we haven't thought broadly enough as an agency, and we've got to start to do that, and I think that's the next step. So to me, all of these issues are interconnected. There is not a mode of transportation. As we look at our agency, I would prefer that we didn't have modal divisions. It's going to take a little while to get there, but it ought to be how we think about it in that systematic way. And I think you can help us by reminding us of that every day, that reminding us that it's not about this highway or that bus or that transit line or that waterway. It's about what are we doing to make sure the system works every day for people that are moving goods and for the public and for strengthening our communities. So thank you very much.